Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. And don't be confused, this is not Have Ghosts Will Travel or Ghost Hunters. I have switched venues tonight, and we are talking about a true evil that has infected our country and has affected all forms of our economy and our lives. And I have invited some distinguished guests with us tonight to talk about this program. And this is a live call-in, and we want you to call in tonight, and we're going to make this a proactive program. We want you to call in to give us some tips and to ask questions. And some of our guests that we have brought in tonight is Tony Talbot, who is the chair of Abolition Ohio, and next to him is Aaron Meyer, who is the programming officer of End Slavery of Cincinnati. And next to her is Heidi Lorenz, who is the interim executive officer of Be Free Dayton. Next to her is Tanya Folks, who is the co-founder of Be Free Dayton. And next to her is Detective Melanie Phelps, who is the human trafficking detective with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. And next to her is Captain Michael Britton, who is with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. And I'd like to start with Tony Talbot. Could you give us some examples of the work that you have been doing with Abolition Ohio?
Sure. Well, we founded Abolition Ohio in 2011. It's the Anti-Trafficking Coalition for the Miami Valley. Essentially, we're a coalition of coalitions. There's some great organizations, great church groups, social service agencies, law enforcement agencies that we're all really starting to deal with the issue of human trafficking. We know it's a big global issue, and we were really beginning to realize back in the mid-2000s that it was happening locally as well. So we got together, and our main purpose, I think, is to help try to foster partnerships and to spread awareness and education about all forms of modern-day slavery.
Okay. And Aaron, you've worked with Tony. What are you doing down in Cincinnati?
Well, I'm the coalition manager, similar to Tony, with End Slavery Cincinnati. We do a lot of similar things as it relates to engaging the community, developing partnerships, encouraging relationships that will result in coordinated response to the needs of trafficking victims, whether that's partnerships with law enforcement or other service provider agencies, or community groups, student groups, other actors in the community who are interested in the issue and want to educate their neighborhood, their other people that they engage with on a daily basis. So we work with that public awareness and education, but also the Salvation Army's Anti-Human Trafficking Program. I'm the program coordinator there, and we serve clients directly. So we serve labor and sex trafficking victims in the greater Cincinnati area. And that includes Hamilton County and kind of the surrounding counties of Southwest Ohio.
Okay. And Heidi, how have you been relating with these people and working with in your facilities?
Well, through Abolition Ohio, we've been connected, and we've got different outreaches that we work together on for our region of the state, where we reach out to victims where they are, and then we're also a part of different conferences.
Okay. And Tanya Folks, you are a co-founder of Be Free Dayton. And how did you come about to co-founding Be Free Dayton?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So in 2013, we were part of an international organization called Love 146, which locally we could raise awareness, we could raise money, but we couldn't really do anything. So in 2013, a group of us founded Be Free Dayton when we realized the extent of modern day slavery in our community, specifically sex trafficking. And we created, identified and created a before, during, and after sex trafficking life cycle model. So we have programming for people before they're ever recruited, for during, while they're actually victims, and then for after, when they leave the life or they're rescued. And we serve over 9 counties, in the Miami Valley.
Detective Phelps, what is your role in doing this?
Well, I work with all of these different agencies because as a law enforcement officer, we need nonprofits to help us. We can't do everything.
Yes.
When somebody comes to us and tells us about a trafficking issue or that they need help, the sheriff's office doesn't have the resources to put somebody up if they don't have a place to stay or to give them food and possibly job training. So we need to piggyback off of the nonprofits in the area so that we can all do the same job and work together. There's things that they can't do, which is we get the information together in the investigation and present that to the prosecutors, and then we get ready for trial. So we do kind of the aftercare, but there's more to it. They need more resources once they've been rescued. So that's why we all kind of pool together in order to do that.
Okay. And Captain Brim, how are you fitting into this?
Well, I supervise a couple of drug task forces, and we've always done prostitution stings inside those drug task forces. Back last year in the early fall, the sheriff realized that prostitution stings wasn't really getting it. We really needed to focus on the whole human trafficking element, the bigger picture, labor and sex trafficking. So he dedicated a detective, which was Melanie, which she falls under me. So I kind of supervise that unit. We're in the works or in the talks of starting a human trafficking task force. So we're putting many entities together in the same building to combat the problem, I guess on a larger scale with a lot of different services across the board looking at it.
Okay. I've heard talk of a judge forming a capture court where involved women who come into this court for prostitution, where they may be involved, who are caught into human trafficking, and it involves getting these women and capturing, getting them out of the prostitution ring. Are you involved in this?
Human trafficking court in Montgomery County?
Yeah, I hear that we're going to be starting one. I hear
Okay.
it's already going in Columbus. Are we going to be starting something like that
I
here?
have heard of courts in other areas, and I have heard talks about this area, but I have not been involved with. There may be someone else in the panel that could talk more on that. I have not been involved in those talks.
What we do have is a drug court, because what we know about sex trafficking specifically is sex and heroin and sex and drugs are married.
Yes.
And we have a heroin epidemic in the Miami Valley right now. We're losing almost over a person a day, right?
Yes.
Dying. So what that looks like is a very innovative, amazing judge locally named Judge Singer said, you know what, I want to set up a drug court where these ladies come in and they can get services, they can get help, they can get out of this life if they need to. So we do have a drug court. And a lot of the women that come through the drug court are at some point in their lives, not usually, but a lot of times they are victims of trafficking. So we do have it here.
Okay.
Judge Singer is, he's innovative, he's doing things, he's leading the pack as far as drug courts go in Ohio.
Is there anything that we can do here in the community to even help push him along or cooperate with him in this area?
What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, we can reach out. Actually, Judge Singer at the Common Pleas Court is, they've started this drug court. They call it a Women's Therapeutic Court, and they are helping to provide services and resources to, like you said, to sort of redirect. It's a sort of a diversion court in a sense to get them out of the drugs. He sees felonies, so he sees drug charges, not prostitution charges generally. But he's untangling all of that mess. And if you can reach out to, some people could contact Abolition Ohio, and we can put you in contact with the court. And they've asked for volunteers, donations, and support, et cetera, in kind or donations to help the women at the court.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Hamilton County just recently started there. It's called the Change Court, and it's through the Honorable Judge Russell's court, and it's a little bit different. There's a drug court down in Hamilton County as well. That's a felony drug court. This judge work is on the municipal court, so it is based on individuals who are getting charges that are solicitation, loitering to solicit, and other charges associated with prostitution. And so we've been working for the past 6 months in our pilot program, and we've been engaging with a lot of different agencies down there to, again, as Tony was mentioning, this diversion option of connecting individuals with treatment. And again, all these courts kind of come out of the idea that, on average, an individual who has a solicitation charge in Hamilton County has about 11 different charges, and so that's too many. Something's not stopping that. The rehabilitation isn't there. So the point of these courts is to kind of acknowledge the fact that shuffling in and out of jail is not the result that we're all looking for to ending this issue.
If you had a wish list, what do you really need from the public? What could we provide you with to really help you?
Well, we are right now, okay, so when we stood up in 2013, we created our education programs, we were so excited, and then one day we get a phone call from a victim who said, I need help. Now we partner with an aftercare programming organization here in the Miami Valley called Oasis House. Any woman in the sex industry that wants out can go to them and say, hey, please help me get a driver's license, a GED, whatever. And until recently, they didn't have any beds. Well, now they have a house that has 3 beds and one's available. So when we got the call from the victim, we realized in very short order, there's no place for them to go. They don't need, the research shows the average recovery because of post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, drug addiction can be 7 to 10 years. They need a stable environment. They need a place that they can mess up, right? And they need consistent care, because the research also shows that for sex trafficking victims, the majority of them are child victims of sex abuse or sex trafficking who were never rescued. So we totally failed them as a society when they were children by not protecting them. And now they're adults, they turn 18 and we just judge them. Oh, wow, she's, this is America, she's over 18, that kind of thing. So we are running a capital campaign right now called Homes for Healing to purchase a facility so when someone calls, they got a place that night.
And I would go off of that in Hamilton County, there's also not a dedicated sex trafficking shelter, and we are working with different partners who are interested in doing that. But there are shelters who are willing to offer space, like the YWCA, Off the Streets program, Lighthouse Youth Services, a variety of different agencies. The challenge we're facing in the immediate, you get the call and you need a place, is that the majority of the individuals that are calling are addicted to opiates, and most shelters do not have the capacity for detox in their location. So we don't have a 24-hour detox facility or access to 24-hour detox so that those individuals could even get into the shelter for some of that programming, because it's not safe. It's just not safe to detox at home, or there's a lot of medical risks there.
Okay. So for one, you need.
And I don't know if it's the same here.
It is the same.
It is. You know where they detox here? On the floor of the jail.
Yeah, that's
where they
what we're
detox.
seeing here.
Isn't that awesome?
So for one, you need safe health care facility, and for two, you need something like a Habitat for Humanity to build housing for them to stay.
Well, Habitat for Humanity, their mission's different.
I mean, you need something like
We
them.
are buying a facility. We need donations. That's what we
Donations
need.
is what you need.
Yeah. Very rarely do I ever say throw money at a problem in America, but this is a problem where our society has marginalized these people for so long that in some instances we've had women's shelters say our grants say we can't take prostitutes.
Yeah.
They're not women. They don't matter.
To add to that, I mean, the idea of people opening their homes to victims to help them out, that's a horrible idea. I mean, a terrible idea. Like Tanya was alluding to, the victims that we're seeing have untreated, undiagnosed medical conditions, physical medical conditions, psychological conditions, drug addiction, et cetera. When you really think about the life of a prostitute, life, especially a sex trafficking victim, and when prostitution is involving a minor, or when someone is compelled to be a prostitute through force, fraud, and coercion, they're a victim of sex trafficking. So essentially then, if you're a victim of sex trafficking, what's happening, somebody is buying the right to force you to have sex. And in our society, what do we call forced sex? It's rape.
Yeah.
So this is essentially a victim of rape, repeatedly victim of rape. So psychologically, what does that do? We say she because most of the victims have been female, but it also includes boys and men. They suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, repeated complex PTSD, just like soldiers coming back from the battlefield. They suffer other forms of psychological trauma. You can't deal with that trauma on a daily basis, so you shut down. If it gets bad enough, they disassociate. They can go to so far that they have a dissociative disorder. There's so many psychological issues. Alcohol dependency and drug addiction as a coping mechanism or as a controlling mechanism used by the pimp or the trafficker. There's so many issues all tangled up there that it takes a team of professionals a really long time to untangle that. And what we need to do is rescue and restore these people. Okay. So we really do need the shelters like Tanya's talking about with dedicated professional trauma-informed staff to do it.
And another obstacle is a lot of times adult victims of sex trafficking, people say, what's force, fraud, and coercion? Well, force is, force. Fraud is being tricked, and coercion is that emotional and psychological manipulation. They don't identify as victims. Mm-hmm. So if you walk up to them and you say, hey, pimp control prostitution is sex trafficking.
Yes.
Do you have a pimp? Yep. Do you need help? Nope. I'm nobody's victim. That brainwashing is so complete that it takes, in some instances, years to untangle, which is why a bed on the floor of a YWCA isn't going to help. They need a place, like Tony said, with a team, wraparound services. And I can tell you nationally, Ohio is leading the pack. We really are. Buckeyes, when they find out about this issue, they don't just sit around and say, that's so sad. They're like, what can I do? I can speak for a large majority of our support for Homes for Healing has come from the faith community. They hear about it, they say, what? And and they jump in completely.
Yes. Go ahead.
I was to say the homes that they want to get, like the apartment complex, is also going to allow some of those female victims to bring their children as well, where that seems to be one of the problems where people say, yes, we can take them, but they can't take their children. And a lot of those ladies will say, I'm not taking your help if I can't take my children. That's a very important issue, is that the ladies be allowed to include their children when they're rescued.
That's common sense. Yeah.
Yes.
And what a wonderful way to serve the children as well.
Yeah. Okay. I want to remind our audience that this is a live call-in. We want you to call in and participate in this program, ask questions or make comments, give us tips, tell us something that we might need to know. Please call in and participate with us. And this is a $32 billion a year industry. I mean, $32 billion a year.
Yeah. Can I?
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Pat. Actually, the International Labor Organization, which has been around since the 1920s, it's one of the most respected international organizations that deal with issues of forced labor and slavery. They just recently revised the estimate. The most recent data shows that it's around $150 billion a year. Just in the last couple of years, we've taken that figure and quadrupled it. So now it's catching up to the international drug trade. So as far as international crimes go, this is human trafficking, the sale of human beings, men, women, and children, is the #2 crime in the world as far as money goes.
And that's sex and labor trafficking. So we're seeing more often in our communities here in the Miami Valley and Cincinnati area that people are identifying sex trafficking and are rallying behind the sex trafficking issue, but we know that there's labor trafficking in these communities as well, in the forms of sweatshops and factories, restaurants, domestic servitude, meaning people who are working in the home as nannies or servants. We've seen those cases in the Cincinnati area. I'm sure agriculture as well in this community. So we see that here as well. It's just more of the issue, particularly as it relates to the opiate epidemic, is focused on the sex trafficking element, but labor trafficking is here and strong as well.
Right. Now, when you're talking about that kind of money, it doesn't just stay in the back alleys or on the farm. I mean, that reaches into Wall Street and the Fortune 500 companies. That's a lot of power. And like you said, 150 million,
150 billion.
billion a year. That's just this year.
Right. And
Struggle to get
And
money
we're
from
talking, when we talk about sex trafficking, we're talking a local problem. That's what we're dealing
Yeah.
with. So the labor trafficking that Aaron was talking about is a local problem as well. But we live in a globalized
Yes.
world. Like you said, it reaches into Wall Street, it reaches
Yes.
into Tokyo, into Beijing, London, everywhere else. Labor trafficking is really a global, so is sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is really a global phenomenon that we're all complicit in.
Yes.
The clothes that we're all wearing right now,
Yes.
we don't know where they came from. Just one example, almost everyone here is, I assume, is wearing cotton, cotton clothing. Cotton is produced, the third largest exporter of cotton in the world is Uzbekistan, which is in Central Asia. Every harvest season, they shut down all the schools in the country. It's the most brutal military dictatorship in the world, the Karamov dictatorship right now. They force all the kids out into the fields. They force them to pick the cotton. They pay them less than it costs for them to eat, so below subsistence wages. All the profits go back to the dictatorship,
Yeah.
and that cotton then gets spread around the entire world. So even if you get something that says made in USA,
Yeah.
you don't know where the cotton came from for certain. Everybody's cell phone or laptop or computer has tantalum in it or coltan. The single biggest source of that in the world is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's being forced child labor, forced slave labor to mine it, because the Democratic Republic of the Congo is not democratic or a republic. For those of you who didn't know that.
And here we can combat demand as it relates to sex trafficking in a different way. So as Tony was mentioning, with the globalized economy, it's difficult to understand the supply chain of every product that you're buying. But when we're looking at sex trafficking and we're talking about demand, and I know there's been a lot of efforts in Dayton, so I don't want to, if you guys want to speak more as to what Dayton law enforcement has done to combat demand, then I'll head it off to you. But there's a lot of opportunities. It's a much shorter line from the purchaser to the one being victimized or exploited than it is with labor trafficking. So it's just a very different thing that I know lots of law enforcement agencies in our community have been working to combat, and there's been several different advancements in our legislation locally to help support law enforcement's efforts to do so. I don't know if you guys want to, not to put you on the spot.
We haven't had too many actual labor trafficking
I meant
issues
sex
here.
trafficking demand.
Sex trafficking, of course. We always do the prostitution stings, and of course we partner with Be Free, so they're there to collect information from the individuals that are taken into custody as well, whether it be a John or whether it be a prostitute. So they try to collect that data to use in the future so that we can try to figure out what's leading people to this kind of lifestyle or why they would go and seek individuals for sex. So we work with them also to try to create something that's proactive and not just necessarily reactive.
I think one of the things too is that there's not a whole lot of education about this topic until Be Free and us and other law enforcement really got involved in the last year or two. So I think the prevention education, the awareness is getting people to say, oh, that might be this. So they'll call in and talk, or they'll call a tip line at Be Free, or they'll call the sheriff's office and give us information on what could be a human trafficking ring, or just an individual, or a prostitute.
And what people who watch the show need to understand is this is not an inner city issue. This, thank you Internet, this is an everywhere issue. We train all over the Miami Valley, over 6,000 people in the last year. Almost every training, somebody comes up and says, I was at a group home, girl said, I'm being recruited right now. That kind of thing. So if people think that they can have the internet in their house, well, I interviewed a multi-million-dollar sex trafficker who owned brothels, and he operated exclusively in high-end suburbs. Because how many suburbs have a vice unit?
Yeah.
How many people in the suburbs are looking?
Yeah.
So we have a research arm at Be Free Dayton. It's chaired by Dr. Martin Gooden out of Wright State University. We collect data, qualitative and quantitative, and we use that data to really hone our education, because force, fraud, and coercion are the common denominators everywhere for sex trafficking, but the actual recruitment method, that's very unique to each community. You know what I mean? So for instance, we know that young black girls who are recruited in the Miami Valley, if they're recruited more in about 4 to 5 weeks, it seems like they're sold either to Cleveland or down south where there's a larger demand. When we collect data off the internet and look at the demographics, that seems to really reflect that there's not a real huge demand here. It just depends the time of year, what's going on, that kind of thing. But all of that is vital to understand. If we go into schools and we're talking to kids about how they're being recruited, it is really helpful if we have talked to someone who's been recruited out of that
Yes.
school, and we say, hey, did you know this is one of a million ways that it could happen.
I think it's worth noting that the average age of entry into sex trafficking for girls 12 to 14, and for boys it's even younger, 11 to 13. So we want to be able to educate all the students in the Miami Valley, let them know that they are potential to be recruited.
In fact, could you bring up number 14, graphic 14? I want them to see the picture of the victims. I want them to see this. If you look at from the fourth young lady to the bottom, those all look like they're from the same family. Especially if you see them from
That's the same girl.
they're the same girl.
That's the
Yeah.
same
It's
girl.
the same girl. It's a series of her minor
Mugshots.
prostitution mugshots over a
No
brief
wonder they
period.
looked alike. I looked at it for the longest. I said, they must be from the same family. They look so much alike. They're all the same girl, all
Yeah.
of them.
So we talked about the damage and what people are going through. You can see it very
okay.
clearly in that series of images,
Okay.
what that poor girl went through.
Wow. Wow, she was
there's-
arrested that many times.
There's a lot of myths about prostitution that we
Yeah.
have in our society, that like the pretty woman myth.
Yeah.
You know, we have myths about strippers, so she's working her way through college stripping.
Yeah.
So people think that there's a lot of high-class call girls and high-end escorts out there. The average cost of a commercial sex act in the U.S. is around $40. That's the average. So that means the average. There's some of the estimates are that when you look at the total number of prostitutes within the United States, only about 5% maybe are actual high-end escorts. Most prostitutes, it's a very brutal,
Yeah.
terrible existence. The average age, like Heidi pointed out, that a girl being recruited in or a boy being recruited in, they're 11 or 12. No 11 or 12-year-old wakes up one day and says, I want to be a prostitute. None of them even really understand sex.
Yeah.
They have to be manipulated, they're lied to, they're taught, trained how to do sex. They're moved forward, and they're just, when you really think about this, it can really turn your stomach. It's
pretty dark.
Absolutely.
It's a very dark thing that we just accept, and it's throughout our culture. Look at magazines, look at television shows, look at advertising. Sex sells. And you can see images of younger and younger boys and girls that are highly sexualized in all of our media as well. So there's something about our culture right now that we've got to, most of us here, almost everyone doesn't like this, doesn't appreciate this at all. We've got to sort of take back our culture and change that, reduce that demand for sex, especially with minors, reduce the demand for super cheap goods that are coming from who knows where around the world that are being created by slaves. And it's on us, the consumers, I think, to really change that.
Yeah. And how can we identify the slave goods? How can we do this? Like you go into Walmart, how can we identify something that's not made by slave labor?
Well, there are some websites that are, I know Slavery Footprint is one of them, Free to Work, that's out of the Not for Sale campaign. These are websites and apps that you can use to be a better informed consumer.
What is that again?
Free to Work.
Free to Work.
.org.
freetowork.org.
It's out of the Not for Sale campaign, but it's an opportunity. I know during Christmas time they advertise for the app, and it's this app that you can scan the barcode when use your smartphone to scan a barcode, and then it tells you whether or not potentially slave labor was used in the creation of that product, and then gives you alternative products to buy. Now, of course, all this information, though, is based off of research done by like the International Labor Organization and other agencies to get an understanding of where that child labor or forced labor is coming from. But until we know more about that, we know a little about that, but we don't know a lot about specific industries, specific agencies, because a lot of that, as Tony was saying, your shirt says "Made in USA," but you don't know where all those other different things came from. You don't know which factory specifically that came from. So there are some pieces of legislation in Congress now and in state areas that focus more on kind of transparency among that supply chain, encouraging contractors and subcontractors, other countries to have more transparency in how they're producing their part of that supply chain, but it's a long way to go.
Yeah, in 2012, California passed a law called the Transparency in Supply Chains Act, which requires every large retailer and manufacturer, essentially in the world, to have a statement on their website that says what they do to try to minimize human trafficking, forced labor in their supply chains. So anybody, you can Google that, on your smartphone while you're shopping. You can look it up to get an idea of what that company does. But the easiest thing I say for folks to do, if you're concerned at all, sort of vote with your pocketbooks. Look for products that say fair trade or direct trade. That's a step in the right direction, and that's something simple, especially luxuries. Not everyone can afford to buy a lot of fair trade items and direct trade items. Slave-free items are more expensive, because they're paying the people making them fairly. So it raises up the price. But at least things like coffee, tea, chocolate, buy the fair trade or the direct trade alternatives, and at least on that luxury, you're making a positive difference.
And locally, London Co., a woman named London Co., who is a huge advocate
Very much
for
so.
labor trafficking, owns a store called Peace on Fifth. Shop local.
Yeah,
Go to her store, buy chocolate. She has wonderful merchandise.
It's called Peace on Fifth.
And she
on
researches
Fifth.
every single item all the way back. So even if it says fair trade and there's something a little bit fishy in that supply chain, she won't use it. And she is a wealth of knowledge. So when you go see her, you can eat some chocolate. When you leave, you'll know so much more.
Okay. Where's the store?
It used to be on Fifth. Now,
No,
last time I heard,
it's on Fifth, by Fifth and Kiwi,
Okay.
Okay.
downtown, right next to Stivers.
Oh, it is. Okay. Peace on Fifth. That used to be the costume store, isn't it?
It's somewhere right, there's
Yeah.
a little mall, there's 2 or 3 little shops right there.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay.
but she has made it her mission to have nothing in her store that she has not researched the entire supply chain. Sometimes she contacts for chocolate. She'll contact the farmer in another country to make sure, just to make sure. And then she always says start small. So if all you do is start with your chocolate tomorrow, that's a step in the right direction.
And a plug for London, on May 9th, she's having a big fair trade fair at Peace on Fifth. You can go to her website, Peace on Fifth, and find out how you can come by and
She'd be a
shop.
good person to have on the program.
Yeah,
She'd be a
yeah,
great
she's
person to be
great.
on the
You'll
program.
love her.
Okay. Yeah, Peace on Fifth. Okay.
Cincinnati's got great shops too. 10,000 Villages.
10,000 Villages, there's a local shop called It's Only Fair, and there's a couple local chocolate shops, Chocolates Latour, and some others that do local fair trade. It's Only Fair does the same, where they work only with agencies or nonprofits or groups that are 100% fair trade, and they work with those specific agencies, travel there, and make sure that they are aware of everything.
Since we're talking about the fair trade, I went to your Abolition Ohio website and I pulled down a video about the boycott of Wendy's. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happening here?
Sure. First thing, Wendy's, their international headquarters
Yes.
is in Dublin. It's Columbus.
Oh,
So it's,
that close.
Dublin, Ohio,
Yeah.
right. It's Columbus. So it's a local,
Yeah.
You think of Wendy's, they think, it's the heart of it all. It's
Yes.
Ohio. It's this great Midwest thing. Well, this organization called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And just remember, Immokalee sounds like broccoli. That's how you remember. CIW. It's Immokalee is a town in southern Florida,
Yes.
and this organization CIW has essentially become the United Farm Workers of today, like Cesar Chavez back in the 70s. They've been recognized by President Obama repeatedly for the work they do on cleaning up the fields, supporting people. They work for farm workers' rights. They've helped work with the Department of Justice to break up slavery rings for people being forced to work in the fields, U.S. citizens and migrants, mostly from Latin America. But Immokalee, Florida, in this time, during the colder months of the U.S., in the U.S., is the primary source for tomatoes in the whole U.S. And all of the big grocery stores and all of the big restaurants get tomatoes from Immokalee. So back a few years ago, it's been about 5 or 6 years now, there were a lot of hardships in the fields. People were being abused and exploited. So they asked the people buying it to pay 1 penny more a pound. That's it, 1 penny a pound. And by doing that, that would be put into a fund to support workers' rights. So they took on, the first place they went after to ask to do this, refused them. It was Taco Bell. All right, so Taco Bell just flat out said no. They said, well, we're mostly Hispanic, Latinos, your symbol, Taco Bell, we want you to do right. They fought, this little group they started in the parish church in the basement, that's where they met. They got together and they did, after a couple of years, Taco Bell signed the pledge to do a penny more a pound. So then they expanded, they went after McDonald's, every major fast food company in the US, except for Wendy's, has signed the Fair Food Pledge to give them an extra penny a pound.
Yes.
They've gotten a few, Trader Joe's has signed, a few other grocery stores have, but our nice homegrown Kroger's in Cincinnati has not signed either and will not support the Fair Food Program. So we have 2 big corporations in Ohio that aren't playing well.
Right here in Ohio.
Yeah, so their story is fantastic.
Okay. Go ahead and run the Wendy's clip.
For 2 years, Wendy's has been giving us the excuse that they're already purchasing from farms that are participating in the program. And now the corporate office is saying that they have moved their purchases to outside of Florida. We want Wendy's to be a part of the already proven solution that is the Fair Food Program.
Cuando la negra te invite a bailar, no le digas no. Cuando esta negra te invite.
And it is because of this that we, as the Student Farm Worker Alliance, are saying today that we are launching a national student boycott against Wendy's.
¿Dónde está Wendy's? Corriendo, escondiéndose, después de que tira la piedra, golpea a los trabajadores que son los que han hecho posible que tengan ellos su... tengan ellos su riqueza y su poder.
I went to your website and I saw what you had on there, and I was floored by the information that you had, and it just opened the floodgates. And after looking at that, this program became a series. I said, there is just too much out there. Just doing one program isn't enough. I can't do enough justice to the subject. So after seeing this, this program became a series. I can't stop here. I'm going to have to continue with this. And so far, I do have 2 more programs lined up after this, after watching this, because there is too much information out there. I can't stop here. I'm going to have to continue with it. Because just with your website alone, I probably can go another couple of years just making a series after this. At least once a month, I'm going to have to do another program off of this. Because there is so much information out there that we know nothing about what's going on here. And here is a homegrown company right here in Ohio that we know nothing about what's going on. So I said, after watching this, This is now a serious program that I am doing here, and I'll probably be asking some of you to come back again for updates on what's going on in the field. You know, so hopefully I'll be bringing you back some more. So, okay. So like I said, this is you say $150 billion a year industry now. And how else is this affecting us? I know that there is a anti-trafficking bill in Congress that is being held up by 2 senators, one Democrat and one Republican. It's being held up by these 2 individuals who won't let it pass. I says, with that kind of power, you know, it
You
should
know
be reaching
what?
to our
We don't
governor.
need Washington necessarily to solve the problem.
We're not gonna
I
get
mean,
it
think
from
of all the
Washington.
problems they have solved in the history of
No.
the United States. This is a grassroots. We believe this is a Be Free Dayton. If everyone takes responsibility, learns about the issue for themselves, their family, and their community, it's over.
Yes.
It's over. It's that simple.
Because a lot of it, as you're alluding to, a lot of it is a perception change. And we've seen that perception change encouraged through legislation, both federally and locally, statewide and locally. But it's the perception change for changing that stigma that you mentioned before, not seeing someone that is a victim of sex trafficking or a victim of commercial sexual exploitation as less than a person, not seeing an undocumented individual or documented individual being forced to work in the fields as less than a person, but instead, or even being seen as a criminal, but instead seeing that individual as somebody that's worth connecting with, that has value, that they might not know themselves, and encourage that empowerment within that individual and encourage them to be able to be the person that they want to be, which we have to do each individual person. We need to ourselves own that perception. We need to not use language like pimp in a positive context. We need to be reshaping our cultural understanding of the issue so that kids aren't growing up thinking it's okay to manipulate women or boys or anybody else into making money for me. We need that shift in mentality, and it's getting there amongst many in our community, but there's still a lot to go.
Yeah.
If you think about kids and the games that they play, for example, video games, got Grand Theft Auto.
Yes. Yes.
To level up, you have to sleep with a prostitute and then you have to kill her. That's how you advance in the game. And so thinking, like Aaron said, about our culture and reshaping what kids are playing with or exposed to will help change that language and that perception.
In our trainings, I like to give this example because it's hard. It's a hard concept for some people. They're like, "Not my child." Imagine Laura Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Okay, you have her here, and then you have a young girl who grew up with Bratz dolls, which are basically plastic prostitutes that they role play with. Don't believe me? Hold one up to the prostitutes in Grand Theft Auto. They're wearing the same outfits. Okay? So which one do you think is going to be easier to force, to fraud, or to coerce into selling her body to multiple people? The girl who grew up hearing sex is cool, sexy, 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 or Laura Ingalls? Which one's easier?
Yeah.
Right? So our culture is grooming our children in a way to be sexual. But then when they hit that magic age of 18, we start judging them if they're hypersexual or if they're in the sex industry. We are doing, Be Free Dayton has a demand reduction program. It's run by men. So for instance, we know that men who buy at the street level, which is a very small percentage in the Miami Valley of sex trafficking, most of it happens online.
Really?
So men who buy at the street level, their motivations are different than men buying at that middle online. So they explain, they walk people through that, what that looks like. Why is motivation important? Because in all of the research, I've heard people say, there's no research on demand. That's one of the biggest bodies of social science research I've ever seen. It goes way back. Why do men have sex with prostitutes? Kind of research. And it seems the same themes recur over and over and over. And at the bottom of it, most men do not believe paying for sex hurts the woman. They don't believe it. 99% of them believe she enjoys the sex.
Well, you're talking about, to defend men a little bit, you're talking about 99% of the people who are purchasing
Right,
sex.
which is like 15%
Right,
total.
so I mean,
Because
there's
we
a
think-
difference.
Well, we think, yeah, I don't want to say every man. So a lot of people in this movement say, you know, every man, and I don't mean to imply that. The research actually shows that roughly 15% of men at any one time have actually purchased sex. But they see it as a commodity, right? Something to be purchased, something to beg for. It's not, you know, it's not hurting her. How awesome is it you get paid to have sex? I mean, that's pretty awesome. It's in their mind. So it's a shift in their whole thinking, right? They've got to realize that force, fraud, and coercion is a part of the story. And just like pornography, people say, well, how does pornography play into it? Does pornography make men go out and buy sex? I don't personally believe necessarily that is something that you can say definitively, because if you look at how many people have seen porn and compare it to only 15% of men have actually bought sex, that's quite a leap. However, when you're watching porn, how do you know? Is she forced, frauded, or coerced?
Yes.
Just because she's smiling and enjoying it on camera, does that camera mean that she's choosing it? Would your mom choose it? Would your sister choose it? Then why would she choose it? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And talking about this, there's internationally, there's at a country level, there's sort of 3 different ways you can try to control prostitution and deal with prostitution policy. We have the model in the U.S. that we've had for a long time. It's starting to change now, but basically what we've done is we criminalize the sale of sex. So we used to go after, for years and years, if there was prostitution taking place, we would go out, we would tell the men purchasing the johns to go home, and we would arrest the prostitutes.
Yes.
So we've criminalized the sale of
sale.
sex, right? Obviously, that's very ineffective. It doesn't really work, because the women go in prison over and over and over and over again. They come out, like Aaron alluded to earlier, and the epidemic has continued. We have the trafficking epidemic. Another way people say, well, why not just legalize prostitution? And so if you legalize prostitution, then it'll move it out of the shadows. It won't be criminal anymore. Well, the Netherlands did that years ago. And what they found is that human trafficking within the Netherlands is not decreased at all. The exploitation of women is increased. If you have legal prostitution, you have sort of the front street in the little booths. I don't know if you've seen those, the streets you go down, there's little booths.
Yeah.
That's legal prostitution. Most of the women there are very desperate and have not really chosen this job. They've sort of been at least compelled somehow into it. But on the streets behind that, that's expensive. There's still the low-end prostitution that involves the sex trafficking and a lot of illegal prostitution that still occurs. The third model, so that was just decriminalizing everything. The third model is what Sweden adopted a few years ago. And it seems to be working pretty well, but though we're still too early to tell for sure. What Sweden did was they decriminalized the sale of sex and criminalized the purchase of sex. So if there's a street prostitution occurring, the police will show up and they'll arrest the man purchasing sex, and they'll treat the prostitute as a potential victim, refer her to services, and get her home. She will not be arrested, she will not be charged, but the purchaser will be.
Remove the demand.
And they're trying to remove the demand. Like I said, the data, we don't have solid data yet, but it seems to make a lot of sense to me.
And they have education programming attached to that
Yes.
law as well.
Yeah, because I read that, and actually, from the way that I read it, it wasn't really working. When they first instituted that, it wasn't working, and they said, why isn't it working? Because when they interviewed the cops, they still saw it as being okay. So education, they said every cop in the country, it's a much smaller country, every cop in the country has to be educated. So I think they could have just educated the cops, not made prostitution legal. That's not going to happen here. We need to talk about real solutions. Prostitution is not going to get legalized in the United States.
But elements of it have been incorporated into state laws, not fully, and I
Right.
agree that's quite the uphill battle
Yeah.
to go that way. But like in Ohio, there's the safe harbor clause or provision that's in the law that suggests that minors get that option. So minors, they're still arrested, but minors, instead of being incarcerated, there would be a diversion program. So, and some other states have expanded it to adults, but they're so. That's the closest we've gotten to so far.
Did you hear what she just said? Minors, there's laws now to protect minors from being put in jail for prostitution. What do we usually do with children of child sexual abuse? Do we put them in jail? But because in our culture, when it comes to sex, if it's not rape, it's choice. The problem is sex trafficking on the face looks like choice. They'll tell you, I choose this. I was 13, I knew what I was doing. Every prostitute I've ever talked to on the street, you know what she tells me? I am a piece of garbage. I deserve this. I was 13, I was 10, I was 15, I knew what I was doing. They believe it, and our culture reinforces it when we say, look at that girl on the street, right? 14, 15-year-old girls in the newspaper, you see teen prostitute. There's no such thing as a teen prostitute. That child is a victim of sex trafficking and should be treated as a victim, not put in jail. You don't put them in jail, do you, Mike?
No, we do not.
No,
I'm going to put you on the spot. But
it couldn't
they're
be
not.
statutory rape if they knew what they were doing, right?
Well, 16 is age of
Right.
consent in a lot of states for consensual sex, not for sex trafficking.
But in Ohio, there is a provision importuning, so that a John who's engaging in commercial sex with a minor, if she's 15 and under, would be have to register as a sex offender. There's a couple different tiers, and it's a felony.
Yay.
Okay, well, we are getting low on time, and I'd like to thank our guest, Captain Brain, Detective Phelps. Boy, I need to look at her names. I got a lot of guests here: Tanya Phelps, Heidi Lorenz, Aaron Meyer, and Tony Talbot, our distinguished guests who are here tonight. I think our guests who came here tonight to talk about this very important subject and be looking forward for our next program. This has become a series that we will be continuing, and thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope you will see us next month for the next program. Thank you and good night.